On a quiet morning in Hillsboro, Oregon, the police responded to a disturbing scene that would change the town forever. A young woman's body had been found in a grim setting, bruised, battered, and left behind a local Jiffy Lube, hidden in an alley. Her name was Clarissa Bruce, and as the news spread, shockwaves rippled through the community. People in Hillsboro were used to hearing about small-town issues, not violent crimes like this. The initial investigation painted a chilling picture. Clarissa's life had been marked by hardship, and her death seemed to be the tragic end of that struggle. But as investigators looked deeper, it became clear that this was more than just a brutal crime scene. The investigation was about to reveal secrets that would expose some of the town's trusted figures, turning a murder case into something even darker. Clarissa's story was tragic from the start, but her teenage years only added to her struggles. As she moved through high school, she faced severe depression, a weight that became too much to bear. She was often absent from class, distanced from friends, and eventually left school altogether. By the time she was 17, Clarissa felt adrift, unsure if she'd ever find stability. When her mother suggested therapy, it seemed like a turning point, a way to find some relief and direction. They reached out to Dr. Ralph Langford, a well-known therapist in the area with a reputation for helping young adults. He offered what seemed to be a lifeline, a safe space where Clarissa could talk openly about her pain without fear of judgment. At first, it looked like things might finally improve for her. But what began as a hopeful step forward was about to take a disturbing turn. At first, Dr. Langford seemed to be exactly what Clarissa needed. In their sessions, he showed kindness and understanding, making her feel heard in a way she hadn't before. She felt safe opening up about her difficult past, sharing things she had kept buried for years. But over time, something began to shift. What started as professional guidance slowly crossed into unfamiliar, unsettling territory. Dr. Langford introduced what he called intimate healing techniques, presenting them as part of her recovery. These were meant, he said, to help her rebuild trust and self-worth. But Clarissa couldn't shake a sense of discomfort. She felt confused and trapped, unsure if this was normal or if something was very wrong. And yet, under his influence, she convinced herself it might be the only way to move forward. As the sessions continued, Clarissa found herself drawn deeper into Dr. Langford's influence, even as her doubts grew. Then, an unexpected development changed everything. She discovered she was pregnant. The news left her shocked and uncertain. She barely had the means to support herself, working a small jobs just to get by. Now, the idea of raising a child seemed overwhelming, but it also offered a glimpse of hope, a chance to finally have a family of her own. She clung to the possibility that Dr. Langford would stand by her, that perhaps they could work together to create something stable out of the chaos. But when she shared the news with him, his reaction was cold and dismissive. Instead of support, she felt the sting of rejection, making her feel more isolated than ever. The fragile hope she had nurtured began to crumble, leaving her uncertain about what the future might hold. In the days leading up to her death, Clarissa's world grew darker. She struggled with the weight of her secret, feeling torn between the hope of a better life and the fear of facing it alone. She had no idea who she could trust anymore, and the walls seemed to be closing in around her. On the morning of June 4, 2015, that hope was shattered entirely. Early that day, a delivery driver found her body in an alleyway behind a Jiffy Lube. Bruised, bloodied, and left alone in the dim light, Clarissa's life had been violently cut short. Her death wasn't just a tragic end, it was a cruel betrayal. For the people of Hillsboro, a quiet community, the news was beyond shocking. Residents couldn't believe that such brutality had struck so close to home. As investigators pieced together the scene, they were faced with evidence of a fierce struggle, signs that Clarissa had tried desperately to protect herself. This wasn't just a murder, it was an act that revealed a horrific side to someone she had once trusted. The discovery of Clarissa's body quickly set a full investigation into motion. Hillsboro police, faced with one of the most violent cases the town had seen in years, combed the scene for every possible clue. Blood spattered the walls, and small items, a broken bracelet, and earring were scattered nearby, telling a story of her desperate fight to survive. Forensic experts documented every detail, carefully collecting fibers and swabbing for potential DNA. They understood that this was more than a typical investigation. The brutality of the crime demanded answers. Detectives knew they'd need to work quickly to piece together what happened and find justice for Clarissa. By midday, news of her tragic death had spread throughout Hillsborough. The community, still reeling from the initial shock, watched anxiously as reporters gathered near the scene. People wanted answers. Clarissa's life had been taken in a horrific way, and the town was determined to see whoever was responsible brought to justice. As detectives dove deeper, they began examining every aspect of Clarissa's life, searching for any clue that could explain her tragic end. They found that Clarissa's struggles weren't limited to her immediate family. Her turbulent personal life and recent choices complicated the investigation, raising difficult questions about who might have wanted to harm her. The autopsy soon provided key insights. Clarissa was 2 months pregnant, and traces of marijuana and alcohol were found in her system. These discoveries raised red flags, suggesting that her life was more complex than anyone had realized. Her personal struggles, combined with the pregnancy, pointed investigators toward the people closest to her. Initially, suspicion fell on her stepfather due to his history of abuse, but this lead quickly faded. Her mother and stepfather were hundreds of miles away on a family trip with an ironclad alibi. This forced detectives to rethink the case and look beyond her family, widening the investigation as they searched for new answers in Clarissa's circle. With her family ruled out, detectives turned their attention to Clarissa's friends and coworkers, hoping someone might know more about her life outside of home. Through interviews, a new piece of information emerged. Clarissa had confided in a few close friends about a secret relationship. She'd mentioned that the person was older, someone she felt she needed to keep hidden. But she hadn't shared his name, leaving her friends in the dark about his identity. This revelation gave the investigation a fresh lead. Detectives started to connect the dots between Clarissa's pregnancy and this unnamed partner, wondering if he might be involved. They dug into her recent messages, looking for clues, and soon a troubling possibility came to light. It was beginning to look like this secret relationship wasn't just personal, it was a key part of the tragic story they were uncovering. As they worked through her contacts, one name stood out: Dr. Ralph Langford, the therapist Clarissa had seen regularly. With each new discovery, it became clearer that her relationship with Dr. Langford was far more than professional, pushing him to the top of the suspect list. Investigators now zeroed in on Dr. Ralph Langford, suspecting that his relationship with Clarissa had crossed dangerous lines. Known in the community as a respected therapist, Langford had built a reputation for helping troubled teens. But as detectives looked closer, they saw a darker side. Evidence pointed to him using his position to manipulate Clarissa, pulling her into a relationship that no professional should ever initiate. When police brought Langford in for questioning, he tried to maintain a calm, controlled demeanor, brushing off their concerns about his methods. He defended his actions as unconventional but supposedly helpful. However, detectives weren't convinced. They presented him with explicit messages he'd sent Clarissa, which were anything but professional. Langford's composure began to crack as the weight of the evidence piled up. With each pointed question, he grew more defensive, his responses shifting from calm explanations to excuses. The once respected therapist now appeared less like a caregiver and more like a man with dangerous secrets. The investigation was closing in on the truth, revealing just how far he had gone to keep his double life hidden. As police continued to dig, they realized that Dr. Langford's wife, Elise, might hold the key to understanding the full picture. Elise was known around town as a smart, successful businesswoman and fiercely loyal to her husband. She'd stood by him for years, despite growing suspicions about his relationships with clients. Her loyalty, however, wasn't without doubt. Friends reported that Elise had become increasingly anxious about her husband's behavior with young patients. When detectives questioned her, they were met with a mix of composure and hesitation. Elise denied knowing anything specific about Clarissa, but admitted she'd felt uneasy about Ralph's close connections with certain clients. Her loyalty had kept her silent, but now, faced with undeniable evidence, she began to waver. The investigation revealed that Elise had even confronted her husband about his boundaries with clients in the past, though she'd never imagined it would come to this. Detectives now saw her not just as the supportive wife, but as someone who might know far more than she initially let on. Her growing doubt would play a crucial role as the investigation continued to expose the secrets that had stayed hidden for far too long. Just as police thought they had the case against Dr. Langford solidifying, a shocking twist emerged. Investigators discovered that Elise hadn't only been suspicious, she had known about Clarissa's relationship with her husband. Text messages between Elise and Clarissa revealed a tense exchange, where Elise had warned the young woman to stay away from Ralph. Elise's messages, laced with anger and resentment, painted a picture of a woman pushed to her breaking point. This revelation forced detectives to reconsider Elise's role. What had initially seemed like loyalty now looked more like a dangerous jealousy. Friends of Elise described her as increasingly tense and erratic in the days leading up to Clarissa's death. Investigators began piecing together a timeline, placing Elise's whereabouts under scrutiny. Suddenly, she wasn't just the hurt wife, she was a potential suspect, possibly driven by betrayal and rage. With the case taking yet another turn, police faced a tangled web of motives involving both Ralph and Elise. The investigation was no longer just about a therapist's misconduct, it was about uncovering how far Elise might have gone to protect her marriage or seek revenge. The case grew even more complex when detectives stumbled upon a surprising connection to Ralph's nephew, Kyle Langford. Kyle, a 17-year-old known for his intense personality and social struggles, had developed an unsettling attachment to Clarissa. Friends of Clarissa revealed that Kyle often talked about her obsessively, swinging between admiration and frustration. They recalled him sending her long, intense messages, sometimes expressing feelings of anger when she didn't respond quickly. Digging into Kyle's interactions with Clarissa, police found numerous messages that showed a troubling level of fixation. He saw her as someone who understood him, perhaps the only person who made him feel noticed. However, when he learned of her secret relationship with his uncle, his admiration turned to jealousy and resentment. Friends noticed he'd grown withdrawn, spending more time obsessively tracking her on social media and even showing up at places he knew she frequented. When detectives brought Kyle in for questioning, his responses were evasive and defensive. He claimed he had no involvement in her death, but his behavior raised concerns. With his erratic emotions and fixation on Clarissa, he became a new person of interest, adding another layer to the investigation as police considered the possibility that his obsession had spiraled out of control. With multiple suspects now in the spotlight, investigators were under pressure to connect the pieces. They returned to the evidence at the crime scene, meticulously reviewing each detail to narrow down who was responsible for Clarissa's death. Surveillance footage provided a critical breakthrough. Cameras near the alley where her body was found showed Dr. Langford's car parked close by on the night of the murder. This footage, paired with the text messages he had sent Clarissa, painted a picture of a man desperate to keep their relationship and her pregnancy hidden. Detectives began to piece together a theory that Dr. Langford, fearing the collapse of his career and reputation, had taken matters into his own hands. It looked as though he had lured her into that alley under the pretense of a private talk, only for things to take a violent turn. As police confronted Dr. Langford with this evidence, he initially tried to downplay the situation, but cracks in his calm facade started to show. Faced with mounting proof and increasingly pointed questions, his composure slipped, hinting at the desperation that had likely driven his actions. The evidence was leading detectives closer to an arrest, but the twisted path of this investigation still had one final shocking turn. As the case reached the courtroom, the twists continued. Prosecutors laid out their case against Dr. Langford, revealing every disturbing detail of his relationship with Clarissa and his desperate attempts to cover up the pregnancy. The courtroom was packed with reporters, family members, and curious locals, all eager to see justice unfold. The prosecution painted Langford as a manipulative predator, a man who had abused his position and preyed upon a vulnerable young woman. But then, in a shocking twist, Elise Langford, Ralph's wife, interrupted the trial with a dramatic outburst. She stood up and declared that she was the real killer, claiming she had discovered Ralph's affair and confronted Clarissa herself. Elise's confession threw the courtroom into chaos, but prosecutors were skeptical. There was no evidence linking her to the crime, and her confession appeared to be a desperate attempt to protect her husband. Despite Elise's claims, the jury focused on the solid evidence against Ralph. After days of deliberation, they returned a verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. As the judge announced the sentence, Ralph Langford sat in stunned silence, his double life finally exposed. The respected therapist was now a convicted murderer, leaving his family and the community to grapple with the fallout of his actions. Following the trial, the lives of everyone involved were forever altered. Dr. Langford was sentenced to 25 years to life, a sharp fall from grace for a man once respected as a trusted therapist. Inside prison, his past quickly caught up with him. Known for manipulating those around him, he found little sympathy among inmates who had no patience for his crimes. Once a respected figure, Langford now faced a harsh reality, isolated and despised. Elise, meanwhile, was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. The trial had exposed her husband's betrayal and the lengths she was willing to go to defend him, leaving her questioning everything she had once believed. Struggling to find a path forward, she eventually sought support to confront her own trauma, trying to rebuild in the wake of such profound betrayal. Clarissa's family and the community of Hillsborough, too, felt the lasting impact of this tragic case. Her death and the scandal surrounding it served as a painful reminder of hidden dangers that can lurk behind closed doors. In the years that followed, the town worked to honor Clarissa's memory, determined not to let her story fade into just another headline, but rather as a lesson in the importance of protecting the vulnerable. In the aftermath of the trial, Elise found an unexpected connection with Kyle, Ralph's nephew, who had also been deeply affected by the tragedy. Both were struggling with the fallout of Ralph's actions, bound by a shared sense of betrayal and loss. Over time, their shared grief brought them closer, offering a small measure of comfort as they each tried to rebuild their lives. By 2018, Elise and Kyle's connection had grown into something more. They married in a quiet ceremony attended by a few close friends and family, choosing to start fresh and move past the dark chapter that had defined their lives for so long. Together, they sought a new beginning, even welcoming children and creating a family marked by resilience and a commitment to healing. In his own way, Kyle sought redemption. Inspired by his uncle's abuse of power, he pursued a career in therapy, hoping to use his experience to help others who had faced trauma. Elise, too, channeled her pain into advocacy, joining mental health awareness efforts and speaking openly about the importance of recognizing and addressing abuse. Their journey was far from easy, but together they worked to transform their painful past into a future defined by hope and healing.